Welcome back to the deep dive. We're diving deep again into the information landscape, this time looking at May 19th to the 25th. We're pulling out the key insights from the sources you've shared with us, and this week we're really zeroing in on some, well, particularly revealing disinformation tactics. We're going to unpack how seemingly neutral diplomatic language can be twisted. And then we'll shift gears to look at the, frankly, quite bizarre cultural warfare playing out around something like the Eurovision Song Contest.
Oh, hey. And the material from this week, it also touches on other aspects, like some deeply concerning tactics used by the regime in Belarus, and also active smear campaigns we saw targeting both Poland and Romania. We'll definitely pull out the critical details there, too.
Okay, so let's start with something that, sounds reasonable on the surface. This phrase, root causes, popping up regarding the conflict in Ukraine. We've seen it in readouts from talks, calls between leaders. When you first hear address the root causes, you think dialogue, negotiation, right?
That's precisely the deceptive layer. What the analysis this week really makes clear is that this language, it isn't about seeking genuine dialogue, not at all. It's a very specific, calculated manipulation tactic. I think one source even called it a poorly veiled diplomatic disguise.
A disguise. A disguise for what exactly?
Basically, for demanding Ukraine's complete capitulation. The sources are quite explicit about the maximalist demands hidden inside this phrase. It means Ukraine giving up its sovereignty, accepting, forced territorial losses, and ultimately submitting to Kremlin control. It's coded language. It's designed to paint this false picture of Russia being the reasonable party, the one just trying to fix things.
And this lets Moscow position itself quite cynically, doesn't it? The material shows how they use this to blame NATO or invent Nazism in Ukraine or point to Western provocations. It's really an attempt to just rewrite history, as one report put it.
Spot on. And this isn't just talk. It's a deliberate playbook. It has strategic aims. First, it's about manufacturing confusion, really. Confusion over who's responsible. They want people to forget the specific steps Russia took, especially going back to 2014. Second, and this is critical, it sets up impossible preconditions for any kind of peace. By framing capitulation as the only way to solve the root cause, they're not offering a path forward. They're essentially defining peace as something Ukraine could never accept and still exist as a sovereign nation. And third, well, it buys time. Diplomatic smokescreen, basically. Lets their forces regroup, maybe prepare for whatever's next.
Okay, so if that's their twisted version, what do the sources say is the actual root cause? Putting the disguise aside, what's really driving this?
The analysis is very clear, very consistent across the board. The true root cause is Kremlin imperialism. It's this fundamental refusal deep down to accept Ukraine's right to exist as a sovereign, independent nation, making its own choices. And it's really important to understand why Ukrainian sovereignty is seen as such an existential threat in Moscow. Ukraine choosing democracy, choosing independence, it directly challenges the authoritarian model right next door. It shows Russians another way is possible. And, that possibility is seen as dangerous, intolerable by the Kremlin. Remember Putin's huge essay basically denying Ukraine's legitimacy. That denial is the root cause. So the main takeaway here this week is pretty stark. Engaging with the Kremlin's root causes idea isn't a step towards peace. The sources call it, quite chillingly, a blueprint for Ukraine's dismemberment and subjugation. A just peace, the analysis stresses, needs accountability for the aggression, not accepting the narrative that justifies it.
That's a really powerful way to put it. Okay, let's pivot now from that sort of sober diplomatic language to something completely different, but just as revealing about information manipulation. Eurovision. It's apparently popular with many Russians, but the state actively portrays it as, well, as evil, basically.
It's a fascinating contradiction, isn't it? And right at the heart of this anti-Eurovision narrative is this derogatory term they push, Gairopa.
Gairopa. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's a specific slur they created. It equates Europe with being gay, which in the Kremlin's worldview signifies utter moral failure and degeneracy. And this is always contrasted sharply with their own image of a spiritually put-together Russia.
And it's striking that this term, which seems almost ubiquitous now in their anti-West messaging, actually gained traction around Eurovision, didn't it? Back in 2014, positioning the contest itself as an early symbol of this supposed Western degeneracy.
Exactly. And then Russia being kicked out of Eurovision in 2022 after the full-scale invasion, that just poured fuel on the fire. The vitriol, as the sources put it, aimed at later contests like the 2024 one in Malmö, really ramped up.
And the language they use is just, wow. The sources pulled some really harsh quotes.
They really did. You have figures like Zakharova describing the 2024 contest as having outdone any orgy, Sabbath, or ritual sacrilege. I mean, strong stuff.
Yeah.
Pro-Kremlin think tanks called the Swiss winner Nemo a homosexual and framed it as definitive proof of Europe's degeneration. Other labels thrown around were swamp of immorality, anti-Christianity, and corrosive anti-values. It's clearly not just criticism, it's an ideological assault.
Right, and the official state response, according to what we've read, is to demand an alternative, a non-gay analog, as they put it. Which brings us to Putin's edict from February 3rd, 2025, creating the Intervision Song Contest.
Yes, and the history here matters. Intervision was a real thing back in the Cold War, a Soviet bloc contest. Reviving it now is a very deliberate nod to the Soviet legacy, an explicit attempt to rebuild that kind of cultural sphere. And the structure they're setting up is revealing, too. A supervisory board chaired by Sergei Kurenko. One source described him as a pioneer of modern disinformation methodology, someone who genuinely believes society should be programmed. And then you have Lavrov promising Intervision will be free of perversions and mockeries of human nature. The message is loud and clear.
The list of expected participants is interesting, too. Belarus, Azerbaijan, Brazil, China, Kyrgyzstan, Cuba, some Middle Eastern countries. And the selection method. Just the leader of each participating country's pop charts seems convenient.
Well, yes, potentially very convenient for state influence, right? And Russia's own representative, Shaman Yaroslav Dronov, he fits this perfectly. He's a huge Putin supporter.
His songs, Vostanem, described as a war anthem, and Ya Ruski, saying, I am Russian, despite the whole world. They're explicitly nationalist.
Absolutely. The sources point out his militarist aesthetic and nationalist rhetoric. Some analysis even draws comparisons to the propaganda styles of 1930s Germany. It's a world away from how Russia used to present itself culturally.
It really is. I mean, think back just to 2003. Their Eurovision entry was TATU, pretending to be a lesbian couple. It feels like a different universe compared to now, where the state has actually labeled the international LGBTIQ plus movement as extremist. The shift is just profound.
That comparison nails it perfectly. The analysis really concludes that Intervision isn't about music much at all. It's about cultural warfare. It's a core part of their strategy to redefine culture, reject anything seen as foreign or liberal, elevate the state, tradition, and position Russia as this new center of power. And, looking beyond just those two big themes this week, the sources also really highlight the sheer breadth of these tactics with other examples.
Yeah, that focus on Belarus was particularly grim, wasn't it? Especially around May 21st, the International Day of Solidarity with Political Prisoners.
The regime's approach there is chillingly systematic. They actively use repression as a tool. They refuse to even call them political prisoners, just labeling them regular criminals. This is despite all the reports of torture. And the crackdown on online activity is severe. Just liking something online can get you convicted. State TV targets Belarusians abroad too, calling them fugitives, making threats, but also running these campaigns, inviting them back. A big part of that is the State Return Commission and those staged repentance videos you see on TV. They feature people reciting scripts, obviously under pressure. It's meant to boost the regime's image and, really cruelly, pressure families still in Belarus. Creates impossible choices. The examples mentioned of the young woman and man in recent reports really drive home how coercive this is. And the sources also brought up those tragic cases like Tamara Karavai and Hanna Kondratsenko, who died soon after release. The analysis raises serious questions about harsh conditions and maybe delayed medical care playing a role. It's deeply concerning.
And then, quickly switching geography, there was also that pro-Kremlin smear campaign against Poland this week, including reviving that old nasty hyena of Europe label, pushing false Russophobia claims after things like the consulate closure or that mall fire in Warsaw.
Right, and the analysis provides important context there. It points out that Poland's actions boosting defense, tightening security, aren't some irrational Russophobia. They're direct responses to documented Russian aggression and, frankly, a pattern of sabotage happening on Polish soil. It's reactive, not proactive hostility. And finally, the sources flag that false claim about Western interference in Romanian elections. Remember the Pavel Durov allegation, which notably had zero evidence, apart from a weird baguette emoji. The French government actually had to publicly deny it. They clarified their talks with Romania were about security threats, terrorism, child exploitation material, absolutely not about elections. But then the Pravda network jumped on it, pushing this narrative about a European mafia stealing the election. It's a classic playbook move we see often, invent stories about shadowy elites to wreck trust in democratic processes.
So, bringing this all together for you, the listener, why is getting into these specific sometimes quite granular examples so important. Why does understanding these tactics matter?
Well, because recognizing the patterns is really everything. Whether it's twisting diplomatic language like root causes or weaponizing something totally unrelated like a song contest, seeing these methods repeat helps you look past the surface noise. It helps you grasp the underlying purpose. And as we've seen this week, that purpose is almost always about creating confusion, justifying aggression, sowing distrust, or just fundamentally redefining reality to fit state goals.
Right, understanding the why behind it all. Okay, so to quickly recap our dive this week, we look at how root causes can be a mask for imperial ambitions. We saw how Eurovision is being turned into a stage for cultural warfare and nationalist posturing. And we touched on specific manipulation tactics targeting Belarus, Poland, and Romania.
Maybe a final thought to leave you with. If state power can try so actively to redefine basic concepts like peace or co-opt something universal like music just for strategic control and silencing alternatives, what does that tell us about the ongoing complex challenge of just navigating the information spaces we all live in today?
A really important question. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the information landscape this week.